There are over 120,000 people buried in this graveyard, and around 100,000 of them rest in unmarked graves. No headstone, no inscriptions, but why? Well, unmarked graves were sometimes used to hide away criminals, but for many ordinary people, it came down to one thing: cost. Because even dying can be expensive. In fact, if you want to be buried here in Undercliffe Cemetery in Bradford, it's going to cost you over £2,000. And that's before you even start thinking about a headstone. Now, just in case you're concerned this video might be a little bit morbid or somber, don't worry. It's actually going to be, I think, quite uplifting and motivating, because I found a couple of incredible stories of women who were buried in this graveyard, who both lived very distinct but incredible lives. So we're going to pay them both a little visit, learn a little bit about their life stories, and of course, we're going to have a bit of a look around as well and just check out the rest of this place, because it's pretty incredible, as you can see. Now, the first person we want to visit is a woman called Nancy de Garrs. And Nancy's story is pretty amazing. She's most well known for having spent 8 years working for a man named Patrick Bronte. Now, many of you will recognise that name, and if you're still not familiar with the Brontes, you've probably heard it coming up several times on this channel recently, and it's not intentionally, I promise. It just happens to be that so many of the stories that I kind of find around Yorkshire have connections and links to the Bronte family. And Nancy's one of those, because for 8 years she was the nanny for the Bronte family, looking after the Bronte children and assisting around the house. She started working for Patrick Bronte when she was around 12 or 13, pretty young, but that was kind of common for that time to start work around that age, if not before. And throughout her time there, she developed an incredible relationship with Patrick and the whole Bronte family. So much so that she spoke very highly of them, and he spoke incredibly highly of Nancy as well. In fact, Patrick once wrote a letter to Nancy, which she eventually framed and hung on the wall in her own home. And today, from what I understand, that letter is now in the Bronte Parsonage Museum in Haworth. Before we carry on that story, we have to just have a look and see what this is. This central obelisk, kind of dominating the entire cemetery. I'm not sure how easy these are to read on camera. We've got Benjamin Farrer, died 1868, Jane Belk Farrer, wife of the above. I feel like, given the size of this, I should know who this family are. We've also got George Belk Smith, Margaret Smith, Harry Russell Smith. Is there any more context? Joseph Smith. It's so difficult to read. Weirdly, I can't quite figure out who those people were. Now, throughout Nancy's time with the Bronte family, she would often take the kids out for walks. Charlotte had just been born when Nancy started working for Patrick, and the rest was soon to follow. So she would take them out on walks over the moorland, tell them stories. And it's a bit of an assumption on my part, but I think it's fair to assume that she probably had quite a big influence on the Bronte family, and maybe even influenced the writings that went on to become world famous. And because of her time with the Bronte family, Nancy became fairly well known in the local area. Many people who met her in later life always were asking about her time with the Brontes, wanted her to tell the stories, and apparently she was always very excited to retell her time with Patrick and the family. And on the subject of unmarked graves, Nancy's story is quite pertinent because up until 2019, nobody knew exactly where she was buried here. They knew she was in Undercliffe Cemetery, but exactly where was a mystery. So eventually her location was discovered, and a number of very kind and generous people started a campaign to raise funds to pay for a headstone. And it's that headstone that we're looking for right now. This is where I may need to get out my map of the cemetery because it's so big. I thought this was the right area, but let me have a quick check and get back to you. I think it's somewhere in this section here. Wow, this is an old one. Unfortunately, not going to be able to read anything on there, but I can only imagine how long that's been here. This cemetery opened in 1854. Now, it should be fairly easy to find because it's a new stone. I think it was set here about 3 years ago now. So Nancy, I now know, thanks to the very helpful team here, is somewhere down here. In case there are any little gaps in the video, by the way, any jumps, it's because there are people here attending graves of family. This is a graveyard that is still used for new burials. So obviously I don't want to actually get in anybody's way. I think this is it. This just taken me about half an hour to find. That's my own fault though. So I'm not going to walk any further because these are all graves. Hopefully you can read it from here. It says, "In loving remembrance of James Scully, Mary Stocks, née de Garrs, and Nancy de Garrs, John William Scully." So Mary was one of Nancy's sisters, and I think John and James were the family that she married into. And there's a quote down there from Charlotte Bronte that says, "There's no use in weeping, though we are condemned to part. There's such a thing as keeping a remembrance in one's heart." Now there's one last quote in relation to Nancy that I wanted to read you. It's a quote from Nancy herself, because one of the consequences of her time with the Brontes is that she gathered a lot of public interest later in life. And so there are a few interviews on record with Nancy, and I've got a quote here from Nancy speaking about Charlotte Bronte, which I really liked because it feels relatable. You'll see what I mean, hopefully. And she said, "When distinguished visitors came, it was always a matter of difficulty to stop Charlotte from silently stealing into the drawing room. And when they had gone, she would criticise their appearance, manner and speech with such cleverness that her father would often laugh heartily in spite of the utmost efforts to restrain himself." The reason I like that one in particular is because that period of history is so often painted as people being so stern and serious, whereas actually in reality they were just like us. But the social norms and expectations, how we communicate, were a little bit different. And that really brings down the veil a little bit, making them feel so relatable as a family who did what they needed to do in social situations, but had a laugh. And it paints Charlotte's incredible intelligence and wit that she became so well known for. Now from one incredible woman to another, next up we're going to try and pay a visit to a lady named Julia Varley. Now Julia's life was very distinct from Nancy's. They didn't share too much in common in terms of what they went on to do, but both incredible and remarkable stories. Now Julia's life in particular, very difficult to distill because she did so much. In fact, we could probably do an entire episode on Julia's life alone. Like Nancy, she also started working at age 12. She was spending half her time in school and half her time sweeping in the mills. And this might be where Julia's passions for workers' rights and women's rights started. Because at the age of 14, she joined her first workers' union. Now I don't know about you, but when I was 14, I don't think I was really doing anything to contribute to society. And that's not me being harsh on myself. I just don't think I was really doing anything of meaningfulness back then. But Julia was already well on her way. In fact, at 15, she became the secretary of a local textiles union. So only 15, but we can see a pattern emerging here in Julia's passions and kind of firm beliefs. When she was 20, she was supporting strikes in the local mills, fighting for fair pay and reasonable working conditions, and she was always encouraging people to join these unions. And this passion for workers' rights, this dedication never really slowed down for Julia. And it's not as if she had an easy life. When her mother passed away, she was left to look after her younger brothers whilst working, whilst supporting the unions. I can't imagine she had a lot of free time. And she really made a reputation for herself. She became the first female member of the local trades council. And at one point, she was invited to move to Bourneville by Edward Cadbury. You might recognise that name because Edward was the grandson of John Cadbury, founder of Cadbury's Chocolate. And this was a company I only recently learned were very invested in workers' rights, and that was the reason that they invited Julia over to live in Birmingham. And she spent much of her life there before later on returning to Bradford. She joined the suffragettes movement, probably not a surprise to you at this point, and she was actually arrested twice because she took part in what's on record labelled as a raid on the House of Commons. Now I don't think this was a warlike raid, but more a peaceful protest, I assume, where they tried, maybe even succeeded, I'm not sure, to gain access to the House of Commons. The suffragettes movement, by the way, in case you're unaware, was the fight for women's right to vote in the UK. So she spent these 2 stints in prison, one of them for 14 days, because she refused to pay a fine that was served to her in response for this arrest at the House of Commons. And one of the many things that's interesting about Julia is the way that her life kind of pivoted in terms of the way she was accepted, let's say legally and socially in some sense. Because while she did spend 2 weeks in prison in London, she was later in life awarded an OBE for public service. Now this is an award given by the King or Queen of the country at the time, instigated by the ruling Prime Minister. It's a very high level award. And I just love the contrast of going from being in a prison to being awarded an OBE. And I think that's a real nice way to highlight that Julia was somebody so dedicated and committed to doing what she believed was right, regardless of whether it was socially or legally accepted. And I find that quite inspiring. Now that's just a handful of the things that Julia accomplished during her lifetime. And after hearing all of that, you might be thinking, well, which one of these amazing monuments is hers? Well, brace yourself, because we're about to find out. Okay, here she is. Well, actually not here or there, but all the way over there. So one thing that I do like about this place, actually there's many things I like about it, is that they've very kindly put QR codes on some of the more notable locations. So you can scan these, get some additional really detailed and well-researched information about certain people who are buried here. And what they say of Julia's grave is that it's all the way over there, right by that tree. So it's not really very accessible for us. I'm not going to walk over these graves to get there, but her gravestone is somewhere just in front of that tree there. A little bit of a contrast to some of the enormous stones and monuments that we walked past, but it's here nonetheless. Now, how exactly she came to be buried there, and if and what is on the stone, if it does exist, I don't know. That's a bit of information I couldn't find. Safe to say though that Julia has left a very strong legacy and done a great many good things for a lot of people and a lot of women. Now there is somebody else we're going to try and find before this video's over, a woman named Anne. But before we go and say hi to Anne, let's just have a look around, check out some of these insane monuments. I mean that in a positive way, by the way. As I mentioned, I don't know the history behind all of these because there are so many. So we're just going to read a few inscriptions. I'm going to go to some of the more eye-catching stones. And maybe, if you know more than me, you can help us out in the comments. Naturally, I'm drawn to this. If I was to guess, that's got to be a mayor or somebody like that. It's like a church, actually, isn't it? What does it say? Sacred to the memory of Frederick William Anderton of Bolton Royd, son of Smithin and Anne Anderton. Oh, that's tricky to read. Must be church related, surely. Here's an example of one of the QR codes. Let's check this one. I'm not going to scan the others, but just to show you how it works. Fifth son of John Anderton, who was said to be one of the fathers of the wool trade. Okay, the trade which made Bradford its wealth. I mean, if that's what his son gets, blimey, what's he buried next to? Kind of just picking these at random. There are so many that I could look at, but we'd be here for a very long time. Some sort of Egyptian style here. Oh, this is an actual, what do you call this? Mausoleum feels like the wrong word, but that's what's coming to mind. Alfred Illingworth, son of Daniel and Elizabeth Illingworth of Manningham. More references to the fathers again. So they were factory owners. Let's go and have a look for a few more ordinary, I say ordinary, not in a negative sense, a few more people like me. Let's see where they're buried. Have a look at some of their stones. I mean, these are still pretty grand by my standards. We've got Sarah, wife of the late Timothy Robert Shaw, died 1884. 1906. That's weird, that looks so much older. I guess because of the type of stone, maybe? I'm not sure what I had in mind when I said an ordinary grave, but none of these are anything I would class as ordinary. Huge thank you to everyone who's been supporting the recent videos, by the way. It really is helping to grow the channel and allow me to kind of go further on these trips and spend more time doing research and trying to get access to some more exclusive places like Leeds Town Hall. So hopefully there's going to be some more of those coming up in some unexpected locations. Thank you to everyone who's joined as a member as well. Hope you're enjoying your exclusive sneak previews. You get to see ahead of time where the videos are being filmed. I'm so glad as well we've finally got some sun. I cannot remember the last time I was outside in a t-shirt. This seems to be the site that's the furthest out from the centre. of the graveyard. And these look like they haven't been sort of tended to for a long time, unfortunately. Barely even see these stones. Thomas somebody. What a strange section of the cemetery. And these are not even so, oh, that one, sorry, was not so old. 27, 64, 66. These are fairly recent. My assumption was that this was the oldest part, and so received a little bit less attention. And there's a couple of last ones up here. Let's just check out the very edge before we go and visit Anne. I don't know anything about graveyards in terms of how they're planned and managed, but doesn't that seem strange? Royal Army Service Corps, W. Hunt, 1915, age 20. Okay, one last challenge of the day. We're going to try and find Anne's scarf. Now, Anne's story, in a sense, less remarkable than that of Nancy and Julia. And I don't mean that negatively, but she didn't live a very long life. She passed away at 23, unfortunately, due to illness. Born in nearby Leeds and moved to Bradford. And interestingly, for a period of time, lived next door to world-famous composer Frederick Delius. Maybe he's even buried here, I don't know. And the reason I wanted to visit Anne, as our last stop off in the video, is because she was the very first person to be buried here when Undercliffe Cemetery was opened in 1854. So based on that, we could probably apply some logic as to where she might be, being the very first burial. But logic doesn't seem to be my strength today, because it's taken me a while to find some of these graves. Oh, little bonus find, William Mawson. If you watched our recent video where we went into the prisons of Leeds Town Hall, you might recognise that name, because William Mawson was one half of the partnership Lockwood and Mawson. They were the architects of Saltaire Village, and they entered a design into the competition to design Leeds Town Hall. But they didn't win, they came second. They were beaten by a man named Cuthbert Broderick. But we covered that last time. In memory of William Wagstaff Barlow, born 1822, died 1891. I think this is his wife, also of Catherine, wife of William, died 1901. This is basically summertime. What's the temperature? I bet it's not that high. 13 degrees. This feels like summer to me, especially after the last few weeks. I am, though, the kind of person, I'm very pale. I can burn in cloud, to be honest. Probably burn in this weather today. I'm liking it though. Zero complaints from me. So Anne should be somewhere down here. It might be one of these. It's funny because it looks exactly like this on the photos I've seen. Maybe that one down there. That looks identical. Got Sarah. Here we go. Oh no, that's a different Anne. This is confusing. This is much more difficult than I thought. Okay, I hate to say this, but I can't find Anne's grave. I've tried to match all the stones to a photo I found online. I've tried using the map, and I've walked everywhere. My phone says I've walked 6 kilometers, and I just can't see it anywhere. So I'm really sorry, but that might be one thing we can't see today. So we'll have to pay our respects to Anne from a distance. But she is here somewhere. So that's just a few of the incredible stories that can be found here in Undercliffe Cemetery. And I'm sure there are many, many others, thousands in fact, that are long lost, forgotten, unmarked graves, lost grave sites. If you know any stories that we haven't shared today, or if you'd like me to come back for an episode 2 and have a look at a few other people, let me know. So thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. Hello to all the new subscribers. Welcome back to everyone who's been here for a while. Hope you've all enjoyed the video, and fingers crossed I'll see you on the next one.